In this session, I'm going to discuss what is a Django framework. But before going to discuss Django framework, let's understand which type application we can develop using Django. So let's first of all we try to understand types of application. Types of application. So we can create different types of application like standalone application, standalone application. Second one is a web application, and we have third one distributed application. So we can create different type application. So let's first understand standalone application. What is a standalone application? Standalone application are those applications which run in the context of local hard disk. Like suppose if you want to use VLC media player, how you can use VLC media player? You can use VLC media player only if you have in your system. So once you have installed VLC in your system, then only you can use VLC media player. Suppose we have 100 system. Uh, so if you want to use in all 100 system VLC media player, then you require to install in all 100 system. Then only you are able to use VLC media player in all 100 system. So such a type application is called as a standalone application. It means the application which run in the context of your local hard disk. Until you have not installed the application, you can't use the application. Such a type application is called as a standalone application. So what is a standalone application? The application, we can say the application which runs in the context of local hard disk. That application is called as a standalone application. Example like VLC media player, WordPad, MS Office, yes, no. All such type application is called as a standalone application. So if you want to develop standalone application, so you need to use technology. Which technology? The technology which helps to develop standalone application. So that technology you need to use the technology which helps to develop standalone application. Now we have second one, web application. What is a web application? Let's understand very simple way. Suppose I want to use Facebook. So if you want to use Facebook, then how you can use Facebook? If you want to use a Facebook, so you have not required to install Facebook in your system. Suppose this is your system and we can call as a that is a client. It means the user that uses that system we can call as a client. So suppose user want to use Facebook, so user not required to install Facebook in your system. User not required to install Facebook in your system. So what you need, how you can access? Actually, Facebook is available in a different place. That place we can call as a server. What we can call as a server. Facebook application is available at a different place. That different place you can call as a server. Now, Facebook application available in a different place, we can say in one machine, in different machine it is available. That machine you can call as a server. So if anyone interested to access Facebook application, that once needs to have internet connection first of all. User must have internet connection and user needs to send a request to the server to access that application. Suppose user want to access Facebook application, user needs to send a request to access Facebook application. But how user can send a request? So for that user uses one application that is called as a browser. We can call as a browser. So using browser, user can send a request. So browser we can call act as a client, please. Client, yes, no? Browser can act as a client. So in browser, yes, no? What is a browser, guys? Browser is nothing, is an application, a software by which user can send a request to the server. So whenever any user want to access any, suppose if any user want to access Facebook, so user needs to send a request via browser. In the browser, we need to type the URL. What the URL? URL is known as Uniform Resource Locator. Uniform Resource Locator means any resource that you want to access that you are able to uniquely identify. So it means which resource we want to access? Facebook. So when you are writing www.facebook.com, so this URL actually the unique locator for accessing Facebook pages, Facebook resources. That is a URL, Uniform Resource Locator. So once client send a request, now request go to the server, and the server will actually what does? Server will process the request, and after processing the request, now it will generate the output and will send the response back to the client. So you can check here. Here, if you want to access web application, such type you not required to install in your system. Suppose if you want to access Facebook in, so you have not required to install in your system, just you have internet connection and you can make a request using browser to access the Facebook application. Such type application is called as a web application. It means web application you can access from anywhere without installing in your system. Just you have internet connection and using browser you can make a request to access web application. Suppose 1000 people want to access a Facebook. So on all 1000 people systems, you have not required to install Facebook. They can make a request to access that application via internet. So the application that we can access via internet is called as a web application. Or we can say in simple term, the application which runs in the context of network, that application we can call as a web application. So which type application we can call as a web application? The application we can say, the applications which runs in the context of network. The application which run in the context of network is called as a web application. And one more thing you have need to remember, in case of web application work in principle of client server architecture. On which principle it working? Client server architecture. So here client, this means who want to access the web application. So the who want to access the web application, that act as a client. So client needs to make a request to the server. Once request go to the server, server will process the request and send the response back to the client. So such type application is called as a web application. So here that is called as a web server. This is a server. Okay, if you want to develop web application, how you can develop web application? We can develop web application. There are several technology available. If you are using Python, so in Python you can use Django framework to develop a web application. So when you are going to develop web application, so web application we can say have several requirements. Yes, no? Have several requirements. What's requirements for web applications? You require one browser software, yes, no? You require browser software, you require one technology, we can say. technology to develop client-side application. You require technology, yes or no? Technology to develop server-side application, server-side application. And you require user software. You require database software. So these are components you have required to develop a web application. So actually, what is a web application? Web application, we can say, is nothing collection of web pages. Web application, if you talk about web application, what is a web application? Web application you can call as also collection of web resources, collection of web resources. Web application you can call as a collection of web resources. What is a web resources, guys? Let's understand web resources. Web resources, actually, each web resources is capable to generate one web page. So we can say each web resources is capable of generate one web page, page, one page. You can create web page using, yes or no, HTML. Static page you can create using HTML. And if you are using Python, so you can use py file to develop a web resources. Okay, web resources, basically we have two types. Web resources basically have how many types? We have two types. There are two types of web resources. There are two types of web resources. One is a static web resources. We have one static. Second one, we have dynamic web resources. We have dynamic web resources. What is a static web resources? A static web resources means whose content is a fixed. You talk about static web resources means static web page means a web page whose content is fixed. Whose content is fixed. It is called as a static web page. Static web page. Just like when you have seen any website, in the website there are several web pages. Some pages static pages. Static pages means whose content is a fixed, whose content cannot be changed. Just like you have seen in website about us page, contact us page. In the contact us page, only read information is available in the form of read only. It means you can read the information, but you can't perform any action with that page. Such type web pages is called as a static web page. Now we have second one, dynamic web page. Dynamic web page. What is a dynamic web page? Dynamic web page means a web page whose content value, whose content will be changed dynamically. Whose content will be changed dynamically based on the time of request. Based on the time of request, generate input values of the request. This means dynamic page are those web pages whose content can be changed dynamically at the time of request. Suppose if you want to access Facebook page, login page, so you need to make a request to access a Facebook page. So once you get the login page, in the login page have username and password. You can enter username and password you can provide username and password valid or invalid. And if you have click on login button, then what happen? If you provided valid input, valid username and password, then it will navigate it to different web page. But if you provided invalid password detail, then what happened? It will showing some error message. So it means based on your input, the page response will be changed. Such type web pages we can call as a dynamic web page. Dynamic web page means in which user can interact, user can perform some action, can interact with that page. Such type of pages is called as a dynamic web page. To develop dynamic web page, we need to use technology. Which technology we can use? If you are working with Python, then we can use the Django framework to develop a dynamic web page. So what is the use of Django in Python? So using Django, we can develop dynamic web page. So we are going to develop dynamic web page in Python using the Django. Okay, so so client can access web application by making a request to the web server. Actually, in case of web application needs to be deployed on the web server. So what is a web server? Web server is nothing. Web server is a, we can say, software, yeah, application which can manage the web application. So who will manage the web application? Web server. Actually, you have deployed the web application where you have to deploy the web application to the web server. So what is a web server? Web server software is special, special type, special, yeah, we can say special piece of software, or special, we can say special software, yeah, special software which can manage, which can manages the web application, which can manages the web application, which can manages the web application and web resources and web resources. So we executes, we can execute, we can execute this, we can execute this web resources automatically. So we can execute this web resources, automatically or dynamically, we can say dynamically whenever you you're requesting. Okay, what meaning of this line? Suppose guys, you have a web server. In the web server, you have your web application. You have deployed the web application. So your web application needs to be executed. When this application needs to be executed, if you're developing a normal Python program, yes or no, and you're writing suppose something print hello, yes or no. So this print hello actually code needs to be, you can run on the console and you can check the output in the console. Yes, no, you can run and the output will be displayed in the console. When program will be executed? When you are running. This program in your hands, but web application is not in your hand. Web application are present on the server side. And this web application needs to be executed when? This web application needs to be executed whenever client make a request. This means whenever client, suppose this is a one client, when client make a request, then only that web application is required to execute. So it means web server is nothing, we can say web server is a software which can manage the web application and web resources, and web server will execute these web resources automatically and dynamically whenever client make a request. Whenever client make a request, web server will execute this web resources. So who will manage this web resources? Web application. Web server will manage this web resources, yeah, web application, and web server will execute this web application whenever client make a request. So that is a responsibility of a web server. So let's understand what the responsibility of web server. What is the responsibility of web server? What is the responsibility? So web server actually it's responsible to collect. It collects all client HTTP request. And one more thing you have need to remember. Here, in case of web application, client and server are communicating with each other. Client make a request, server will give the response back to the client. The communication is happening between client and server using HTTP protocol. They can exchange the information over the network by following which protocol? HTTP protocol. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. So whatever communication is happening between client and server, that communication is happening using which protocol? HTTP protocol. So whenever client make a request go to in which form? HTTP request form. And whenever server will return the response, server will return the response in the form of HTTP response. So client server what does, guys? Server will collect all the client HTTP request. Whatever client make a request, it collect all HTTP request. After collecting all HTTP request, what it does? It passes to appropriate web resources of web application. This means once you make a request, server identify client make a request for which web resources, and then it will pass that request to that appropriate web resources. And now web server what does, guys? After that passing, web server proceed built-in middleware software, you can say. And then it will process the application, process the request, and send the result back to the client. So this is a responsibility of a web server. So in this way, we can access web server. How we can access the web server? So this is approach to access the web server. So here we are using Django to develop a web application. So Django actually follow one pattern to develop a web application, MVT pattern. MVT stands for Model View Template pattern. But before going to understand, we understand one more pattern, MVC pattern. Actually, MVC is not any technology. MVC is a pattern to develop web application. So we can develop web application by following the MVC architecture. MVC just is architecture which tells how to develop a web application. So you can develop web application by following the MVC architecture. But Django follow MVT architecture. But before going to understand MVT architecture, first understand the MVC architecture. What is MVC architecture? Let's understand MVC architecture. So MVC, what is the MVC architecture? MVC stands for Model View Controller. Model View Controller framework is an architectural pattern actually that separates into three main logical components. Actually, MVC is an architectural pattern which separate application into three logical components. The entire application, it will actually separate into three different logical components. M for model, view for presentation, and C for controller. MVC. M stands for model, V stands for view, and C stands for controller. Before understand what is MVC, here we understand MVC pattern with real life example, and then we will come back what is MVC. Let's check this diagram. Suppose if you go to a restaurant, yes, no, so you will not go to the kitchen and prepare the food, which you can surely do at your home. Yes, So instead, you go there and wait for the waiter to come on. So in the restaurant, when you go to the restaurant, what happened? You can check here. You are waiting and for the waiter. Once waiter comes, so then what you do? You order the food. So when waiter comes, then you order the food. When you order the food, that time waiter doesn't know who are you and what you want. Yes, no? Waiter is waiting. Yes, no? You checking menu and you are ordered the food, but waiter doesn't know who are you and what you want. And what you want, yes, no? Just he written, yes, no? Written down detail of your food order. Now, whatever you are suggesting to waiter, it will write down all your order. Then waiter, what is the responsibility of waiter in a restaurant? Responsibility of the waiter is responsible to take the order from a customer. This is only responsible to take the order from the customer. Once waiter take the order from the customer, then waiter moves to the kitchen. Waiter moves to the kitchen. But in the kitchen, waiter does not prepare your food. Waiter does not prepare your food. So waiter is responsible to take the order. Once waiter take the order, then waiter move to the kitchen. But in kitchen, waiter does not prepare your food. Who will prepare food? In the kitchen, there is a chef. One is a chef. One is more person is there. That person you can call as a chef. That person will prepare your food. And the waiter, what does actually? The waiter is given your order to him. Whatever order you have placed, waiter just given your order to chef. Now chef will start the preparation for your food. And now chef then prepare food for you, and he uses, yes, no, whatever ingredient to cook the food. Let's suppose you assume your order as a vegetable sandwich. Then cook needs bread, tomato, potato, onion, beet, cheese, etc., which he sourced from the refrigerator. Once once chef make an order, then chef what does? Chef finally hand over the food to the waiter. Yes, So you can check here. Once food is prepared, chef hand over the food to the waiter. Now it's job of the waiter to move this food outside the kitchen. So waiter what does? Waiter take the food and move to outside the kitchen. Now waiter knows which food you have ordered and how they are served. So here you can check here how we can apply MVC architecture. Here you can check here MVC architecture. In the MVC architecture, M stands for model, V for view, and C for controller. You can check here. Here, what the waiter responsibility? Actually, waiter responsible to take order, whatever processing is required. Yes, no, taking the order. Yes, no, serving the order. Yes, no, taking the order and giving the order to the chef to prepare the food. Yes, no, that is called as a controller. That person acts as a controller. This means the waiter are only responsible to taking the request, to taking the order and giving the order to the chef and hand overing the order to the chef. So this person only responsible for this activity. Now, when you move to the kitchen, in the kitchen you can check here all the foods is available. So food can act as a model, data, actual, yes, no, actual food available in the kitchen. So that can act as a model. So now chef will prepare the food for you, and once food is prepared, yes or no, then chef will hand over the food to the controller. Yes, no, controller means waiter. Now waiter will present, yes, no, it will make a food in presentable form and will present to the front of the customer. That is called as a view. Once you are going to present it back to the user, that is called as a view. So here you can check it all there are all in the restaurant. We have different people, and every different people have a different responsibility. So in the restaurant, what we have did, we have divide the work. Yes, no. Similar, when you're developing the web application, you can follow same architecture to develop a web application. So in case of web application controller, so controller we can say that layer which is responsible to processing the incoming request. When client make a request, client can make a request by specify the URL. Server will handle the request. This means who is responsible to process the request? We need to create one component. That is component is called as a controller. Controller is responsible to process that request, and then if you require to process the data, if you require to fetch the data from the database, then controller needs to communicate with model. Model handles the entire data. And finally, once your request is processed, then controller will give the response in the form of view back to the user. View means that you need to render to the end of user. What you want to render to the end of user. What you want to present to the end of user. That is called as a view. So that architecture you can use to develop a web application. So in a VC component, there are three components. One is a model, view, and controller. Model, it includes all the data and its related logic. View, present the data to the user. And controller is an interface. We can say that will process the interface between model and view component. Controller is responsible for whole processing. Controller is responsible for whole processing. Controller is responsible for processing whole request. So that architecture we can call as MVC architecture. But Django, instead of MVC, Django follow MVT architecture. So what is MVT? MVT is similar to, we can say, MVC architecture. MVT stands for model view template. Understand. MVT stands for model view template. Let's understand here what means of MVT architecture and what difference between MVC and MVT. MVT. M stands for model. M stands for model. And V stands for view. Only the difference is T. T for template. T for template. So here MVT. MVT stands for model view template. Okay. So here model in the MVT architecture, model actually what is the responsible? Model responsible for handling the data part. And now here T for template. Just like here you can check in case of view, yes, no. Actually, whatever you want to render to the end user, you can render in the form of template. So you can define the template that you want to render to the end user. So what is a Django template? Django template is nothing, we can say. Django template, in the Django template, you can write the code that you need to return to the end of user. So MVT and MVC just like most are same. Just only you can replace in this way. Understand. Controller. Whatever controller will do in Django, that will done by the view. View is this. Whatever responsibility of controller in MVC architecture, that responsibility in MVT architecture is view. And what is the responsibility of view in MVC architecture? That responsibility is a template. So in MVC architecture, what is a view? In MVC architecture, view is responsible for rendering output, we can say, to the end of user. What you want to render to the end of user. that is called as a view. What you want to present to the end of user, that is called as a view. Similar, in MVT architecture, that is called a template. So it means what you want to render to the end of user, that is called as a template. That is called as a template. That is called as a template. And controller is means responsible for processing your request. Whenever client make a request, you need to serve the request, you need to process the request, and you need to generate the output. That responsibility will done by the controller, and same responsibility can be done in Django by using view. View is responsible to doing that activity.